Great. So on that note, we're actually going to go ahead and start adding data. Great. So first, we're going to start out talking about those data connectors that I mentioned earlier. So the best way to bring data into Domo is to connect to it directly wherever it's stored or updated. Again, want to acknowledge that the file upload button exists, but we're really going to try and nudge people towards these data connectors because they let you connect directly through a third-party application, and also specify how and when they are automatically updated. So the first thing you're going to do is make sure you're in the data menu here. You're then going to go to that data import section right below it and select connectors, which is going to give you a pop-up menu that gives you an option for all the connectors. So here I've kind of pre-typed it so you can see that I only want to see Google options, and we'll walk through an example later where we upload something from Google Sheets. So you would select this here, and then it's going to take you next to your credentials. So if you haven't connected your account already, you're going to have the option to connect your account here. You'll see that mine's already connected because this is something I've done before, as well as some others. But once you put those in, it's something that you're only going to have to do once. You can refer to those later on if you want to bring in a second sheet or create a new BigQuery data set. So next, this is where things are going to look the most different depending on what type of connector you've selected. For Google Sheets, this is details. You're going to search for a particular sheet. It's usually the easiest way to find rather than like trying to browse your entire Google Drive through Domo. I recommend search as a way to find something, and we'll go through that together. If you were, say, using a BigQuery connector, this would be where you would enter your actual select statement for what data you are going to bring in through BigQuery into Domo, as well as have the option to limit large data sets or use the default BigQuery schema. So again, this is going to look different, but if you find yourself using something that we are not talking about in this training, I would definitely recommend that you look up the Domo connector documentation because there is no lack of reference information for how specific connectors work, and you should have some options of other resources to walk you through them. The next thing we're going to focus on is scheduling. So here I have the option to set the cadence of when my data set is going to be updated. The darker number is in UTC, but whatever your default time zone is based on your own Domo account is going to be converted here. And then you can also change what the update method is. So if you're doing a big data set, you might have a specific condition on your SQL data, your specific SQL statement where you just want to append the new data and bring that in. However, a lot of times if I'm just uploading a Google Sheet and it's not particularly large, it's a difference between like 1 and 3 seconds for Domo to do that update. So I might just choose to have things replaced. That may in fact be easier. Lastly, you're going to give your data set the most important thing, which is a name. We usually don't do a description, but it should be something that is going to be easy for you to search and somewhat evident for anyone else who happens to encounter that data set on Domo, basically what it is and what it would be useful for. So give it something that is easy for other Domo users to understand, though certainly also for you. And then finally, you're going to click this Save and Run button and go ahead and create that new data set. So we're going to do a really quick example here. As I mentioned, I'm in the data menu. I'm already here. I'm going to click connectors and I'll put in sheets because that's what we're going to do. So this should look familiar. Here's that credentials section that I mentioned. I've already used this. So there is my login. Just go ahead to next. And then again, for navigating the entirety of your Google Drive, even just the sheets in Domo, I think it is easier to choose the search function. And then I'm going to pull up my Teams RACI because we keep a lot of other stuff there too. Hit enter. And then this will give me the the options that match that criteria for docs that I have access to in Google. So this is the one I wanted. I'm going to go ahead and click there to select it. It's going to load the many worksheets we have in here. Great. And most of the important things are already in Domo, but let's say I wanted to bring in the VSP roster again. So I'd click next. That's everything I need here. I'm going to say, let's see, I guess for this one, it's only given me the option to update every day. So we'll assume that's fine. And then here, because this is not something I actually want to use, I'd put like test to remind myself to go back and delete it later and say VSP roster for training, but spelled correctly. And then lastly, if I were to actually run this, I would click save and run, and then I would immediately be taken to the new overview page for my data set, and I would be able to see it loading. I'd be able to check when it was done loading, and if there were any errors, I would immediately get a pop-up on Domo, and so I'd go back and fix it. Back to our presentation though. Let's cruise on through here. This is what I would see. This is the type of data set overview that I was talking about. So this is a great way to make sure that your data is loaded correctly, and zoomed in with these labels is probably an easier way to explain it. So some of the key things, as I mentioned before, this is where information about the size of your data set lives. This is one of the most important things you're going to probably look at. When was it last updated? Does it match my expectations? If not, do I need to go in and change something? Is there something wrong with my data? Is my data stale? This option here to view and filter your data, that takes you to the data table we talked about before, as well as the schema/data dictionary. This would not be true if you were just uploaded a data set, but if you were to click cards here, you would be able to see all the cards that are connected to this data set. This is also my personal favorite way to create a new card, because there is an add card button there that we'll talk about later. There are a couple different ways to create new cards as well. For settings, if I'd gotten an error, or if I wanted to change my update schedule or anything about what I was updating for this data set, this is where I would go. Also a heads up, if you do not see settings as an option whenever you are going into a data set, you might need to reach out to the analytics team and ask to have your permissions changed, just so that you have all the permissions that you'd need to be able to be an editor, build your own cards, and create your own data sets. So if that's the case, just be sure to reach out in the Slack support channel, and we will make sure those are adjusted for you. For lineage, again, we're not going to talk about ETLs today, but anything that your data set was created to that had downstream effects would be illustrated and linked to here. And then finally, history. This is going to show both a list and then a little heat map for a history of all your past data set runs. So both when they were run, how many rows were brought in. There'll be a little visualization if anything went wrong. It'll be a little red square instead of a green one. But this is also really useful for troubleshooting. If things aren't going as planned, this is a really great place to start looking.